Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Namo Sadando Sujedoye Alahadi Samyao Sambuddhoje. Wu Sang Sen Sen Wei Miao Fa, Bai Qian Wan Jie Nan Zhao Yu. 我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I vow to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning.
Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the Venerable Master, and all of you good-knowing advisors, both here at the Berkeley Monastery and from other places joining us online, welcome to the Berkeley Monastery's weekly lecture on the Avatamsaka Sutra. Today is the 9th of February 2013, and the monk to my right is Chin Wei Sure. My name is Go Shun, and together we'll be presenting today's lecture. Surprise. We will begin by reciting the sutra's title 7 times with our palms together. You can find that on the front of the book that we're using. Today is the 9th of February, and does anyone know what else today is? There are 2 special days for today, the back. Yes, today is the eve of the Chinese New Year, and traditionally, if you are Chinese, from wherever you are in the world, you will spend today either having a reunion lunch with friends and family or a reunion dinner. And that may explain why we have less people here today, I hope. Does anyone know what today is, what the second reason, second special significance? Again, on the back. Close, close, a bit off. Today is the birthday of Avatamsaka Bodhisattva. And Bodhisattva who takes the namesake as the sutra that we are lecturing on today, Avatamsaka Bodhisattva. I'm sure he might be here, making sure Chinweshi and myself don't go wrong, or at least myself. Okay, so we thought of beginning today's lecture by putting what we have learned in context, and we will be revisiting what we explored so far within 10 grounds, from the first ground right up to the fourth ground today. So the 10th ground is chapter 26 of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and it gives us an in-depth look into the Bodhisattva's practices in his mind. As he enters and progresses the Bodhisattva through the various stages of the grounds of a Bodhisattva, the sutra takes us into intimate detail the thoughts, the motivations, and the changes that takes place within the Bodhisattva in his practices as well as his mind, as he embarks on this remarkable journey of compassion and wisdom towards Buddhahood. I used to think that the Avatamsaka Sutra, because it was spoken, it was the first sutra that was spoken by the Buddha, was meant only for very lofty beings that was beyond my understanding or capability, and because it was meant to be a guide on how to achieve Buddhahood. But the more I read the sutra, the more I realized that the principles in the sutra are actually, the Buddha spoke them for our daily cultivation from every thought that we have. It's just that the Bodhisattvas are able to practice them at a higher level. But it does not mean that we do not need, we have to see the sutra as being very far away. In fact, all the principles of the sutra can be put into practice by us at any time. So, okay. So on the first ground, the ground of happiness, before entering the first ground, the Bodhisattva is still a common person. So to transcend the ground of ordinary people, he first brings forth the thought of obtaining great wisdom, but in order to rescue all living beings. So because he is driven by his compassion to help all living beings, and guided by the wisdom of the Buddha's teachings, he is supported by his pure practices and good roots that he has done in the past. So based on all these supporting practices that he has, and his vows of compassion, he enters the first ground of happiness. And why is it called the ground of happiness? If you read the sutra, there are many reasons, but one that stands out for me at least is because the Bodhisattva on this ground is free from the thought of self. And he knows that from this moment onwards, after transcending the ground of ordinary people and being on the first ground, he or she will never be separated from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from now on. So this is what they call being born into the family of the Tathagata. So because of this, he has supreme confidence in himself and where his practices will take him, which is ultimately to Buddhahood. And with that, he leaves all fear and all, the sutra says, all other hair-raising and alarming experiences behind. So I was thinking to myself, to be free from all worries, that would be a great way to go through life. And I can understand how the Bodhisattva would want to share this feeling with all living beings, because I definitely want my loved ones and the people I know to be able to go through life without having any worries at all. And I had a bit of that in Australia, where Reverend Heng Sure is. In Australia, they have a phrase called "no worries." Everywhere you go, they will tell you, I'll try to mimic the Australian accent. They will say, "no worries, mate," or very close to that. And everywhere you go, you hear that. No worries, no worries. If you hit someone, and you say, I'm sorry, they'll tell you, no worries. Everything is no worries. So maybe all the bodhisattvas of the first ground, when they see each other, say, no worries, Mike. So free from all worries, in this state of mind, the bodhisattva is able to make really great vows, which the sutra lists in detail. These are great far-reaching vows, which can be categorized into two major categories. The first of which is the search for wisdom. And the second category is the purpose of him searching for wisdom. So he searches for wisdom because he can then use this wisdom to save all living beings. So it's still based on compassion. So how does the bodhisattva on the first ground practice to help all living beings? The bodhisattva specializes in the paramita of giving and in using kind words, which makes a lot of sense. You can't practice giving if you are using unkind words. You can try it, but it won't be called proper giving. So it is also on this ground that the bodhisattva does his homework to make sure that he knows that he is properly equipped to journey through the second to the 10th ground. I like this analogy because it makes the bodhisattva really human, and of which he is. He is really human. But it is just like, I remember going on a trip. If anyone here has gone on a holiday or a trip, you would know. You would prepare, you make sure you have your air ticket ready, you would have your passport, you have your toothbrush, you have enough clothes, you have enough currency for the place that you're going for. So this is what the bodhisattva does as well on the first ground. He looks and he investigates the second to the 10th ground, and he makes sure that in the first ground, he knows what he gets himself into. The Buddha uses a simile of a merchant leader who leads a group of people, and he investigates the route that he will take to make sure there are no bandits or robbers. He makes sure that his people traveling him have enough water and food to get through the journey safely, and that the weather is conducive. So this is similar to how the bodhisattva, to the work that the bodhisattva does on the first ground. So in summary, the first ground of happiness, the bodhisattva becomes free from the view of a self and knows that he will never be apart from the Buddhas and bodhisattvas in life after life. Because of this, he leaves all fears behind and is able to make far-reaching vows to seek wisdom and to help living beings. Okay, so now we go to the second ground, the ground of living dust. The term dust here represents defilements in terms of unwholesome seeds that are planted through actions of the body, mouth, and the mind. Basically, the three karmas. Okay. The bodhisattva, upon entering the second ground, becomes endowed with humaneness. That means he becomes more human than ever. And his thoughts and his conduct naturally follows the 10 wholesome karmic deeds. What are the 10 wholesome karmic deeds? These are deeds that do not produce any negative consequences whatsoever. If you, just to go through quickly, they are the moral precepts, which are the 5 precepts. They are skillful and wholesome speech, leaving behind all thoughts of greed, anger, and hatred, and leaving behind all wrong views. So the 5 precepts are killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, double tongue, harsh speech, loose speech, greed, anger, and wrong views. So the bodhisattva naturally follows this. There is no way that he cannot. It becomes part of his nature because he has, I wouldn't use the word, his humaneness has been complete. Yeah. And how does he do this? It's because on this ground, the bodhisattva investigates and contemplates and understands all the actions and consequences of the 10 wholesome and unwholesome deeds. So through his meditation, he investigates and he realizes that if you kill, this is what happens. If you lie, this is what happens. But if you don't lie, and if you don't kill, and if you do wholesome deeds, and you give, and you practice the 10 paramitas, this happens instead. So because he sees the positive consequences of wholesome actions, he naturally, because from the base of compassion, he wishes that all living beings may also benefit from holding positive actions. Because he's seen it himself, and he wants everyone to have the same benefits that he has. So the text says, he knows that if one fails to personally cause in goodness himself, and yet nonetheless expects that he might cause others to dwell in goodness simply by explaining such dharmas for their sakes. This would be a complete impossibility. So basically, the Bodhisattva is not a hypocrite. He knows that to effectively share his benefits with other people, he can't just explain them through speech. He has to also show what he has learned through conduct to inspire people, basically. So in summary, the Bodhisattva on the second ground, the ground of living behind death, becomes especially serious in his cultivation of the paramita of moral precepts. And by using kind words in order to show living beings the way, he does not just, and he uses kind words in order to show living beings the way. So now we proceed to the third ground, the ground of flaming wisdom. In the third ground, the Bodhisattva, through further contemplation or meditation, is able to see the true nature or character of all conditioned dharmas. So basically, out of holding the pure precepts, he has developed enough samadhi or concentration power. So in his meditation, he sees the truth or the reality behind all conditioned dharmas, which basically is the whole world, including how our mind functions, how our mind thinks. So he sees flowers for what they are. He sees true money for what they are. He sees his table. He sees people for what they are. And most importantly, he also sees his thoughts for what they are. And he sees how people who depend or cling on conditioned dharmas ultimately leads to suffering. And because he has seen through this, he's able to put it down. It's just, for example, finding out that something is poison, or if you look at a snake that is poisonous, you naturally stay away because you know that that is not good for you. So through gaining this wisdom, the Bodhisattva leaves all conditioned dharmas behind, or his attachments to conditioned dharmas behind. But at the same time, he is also aware of all living beings who do not yet understand the true nature of conditioned dharmas as he has, and of living beings who still cling and depend on conditioned dharmas and who cause themselves endless suffering. So the Bodhisattva wishes to share his understanding with these living beings as well, so that they too may be free from suffering, just as the Bodhisattva is. But the Bodhisattva realizes that in order to do this, he needs some skills. Just as a teacher needs to go to a teaching course in order to be able to teach, the Bodhisattva realizes that he needs to develop his skills so that he may teach people effectively. And he knows that he can achieve this by relying on the Buddha's teachings, on the Dharma. So basically, he needs to upgrade his existing skills or tools. Say, like, for example, a carpenter needs more tools. This reminds me of recently my brother came to visit me from Singapore. My brother is a very successful dentist. He's one of the pioneers of aesthetic or cosmetic dentistry. So he has braces that people can't tell that you're wearing braces if you are. And he does things like teeth whitening, straightening, crowns, caps, everything that someone needs to look good, say an actress or an actor, for example. So he was here recently to upgrade his skills. He comes every year or twice a year to Las Vegas, where they hold many dental conventions, so that he can remain competitive. But the Bodhisattva is on a different level. So this sutra describes the Bodhisattva will go through great lengths to seek the teachings, because he seeks the teachings not for himself, but to save others. So any new dharma that he obtains, either from hearing or from reading, such as we are doing right now, he will then contemplate in meditation on this dharma, and he will also put it into practice, because only then will he fully understand the teaching. And naturally, through this method, his understanding of the Dharma matures, and through that he gains methods in order to cross living beings over. And all this, And all this he does by maintaining the paramita of patience, because you need patience when you are undergoing the meditative process of seeing things as they really are. It's as if you remember Ramon Heng Sure explaining a few weeks ago, and you see things breaking down into their components, you have to bear through it to see it through the final outcome and not give up halfway. So in summary, the Bodhisattva on the third ground, having seen the reality of conditioned dharmas, that means he has seen through the reality of the whole world and how clinging to things in the world brings suffering, he pursues the teachings and the wisdom with vigor so that he may develop the necessary skills to teach other living beings also how to see the reality of conditioned dharmas. So that brings us to the fourth ground. Which Chinwei Xue will take over.
So we're here on the fourth ground, and so Guo Shu gave a very thorough and I think very interesting overview of the kind of what preceded it. So now we know where we are in the fourth ground, and this is the ground of blazing wisdom. The ground of blazing wisdom, and we're on page 12 and 13. So if you turn, can you please turn to page 12 and 13? We're at the very top. So we'll read the sutra text in Chinese, and then followed by English. So we can read it together on page 12. 父子此菩萨修行正见，以直言，以直离，以直灭，回向于舍，回修行正思维，正语。正业、正命、正精进、正念、正定、依止言、依止离、依止灭、回向于舍. So the English together. Furthermore, this bodhisattva cultivates right views. He emphasizes distaste for suffering, emphasizes leaving behind desires, emphasizes cessation of suffering, and makes transference to serenity. He cultivates right thought, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right vigor, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. He emphasizes distaste for suffering, emphasizes leaving behind desires, emphasizes cessation of suffering, and makes transference to serenity. Amitabha. So we're on the ground of blazing wisdom. And so after he's been on the ground of, the Bodhisattva has been on the ground of emitting light, he's entered into a new stage, which is that of the fourth ground. And so if people remember the storyline, what happens is he's seeing the conditioned reality for what it is. And then he comes up with this aspiration after seeing all the suffering living beings have from attaching to that conditioned reality. And so he wants to find the Dharma. He wants to, understand the Dharma so he can teach living beings, as Guo Shu was just saying. So he was putting all his heart, all his mind, giving it all. And he gets tested. If people remember, he gets tested by somebody saying, will you jump into a pit of fire? And our Bodhisattva, in Bodhisattva form, says, no problem. No worries, I can jump into that pit of fire. Actually, if you wanted me to jump from the Brahma heaven down to the hells, into a blazing pit of fire, I have no problem doing that. So how much less a tiny pit of fire? I can do that, no problem. And so that's the kind of heart the Bodhisattva has, just to learn one sentence of Dharma so that he can perfect his Bodhisattva practices. So here, we're in the ground of blazing wisdom. And the Bodhisattva is after learning the Dharma, is putting it into practice. So the fourth ground is associated with that of vigor. It's effort. It's applying strength to the teachings. And so what we're getting here is a very end of a long list. If people have been following the sutra lectures these last few weeks, actually probably last few months, we started with the 4 mindfulnesses. The mindfulness of the body, of the body being impure, thoughts being impermanent, feelings being characterized by suffering, dharmas being characterized by not self. So we started with that, and now we're actually at the very end of this list. And if people are familiar at all with the Buddha's teachings, this is the list called the 37 Wings of Awakening. And so now we're at the very end, and this last teaching, I don't know, do people recognize this? Have they heard this list before? Right, first one's right views, ending with right samadhi. Do people have any idea where this might come from? Have they heard it before, this list? Yeah, Noble Eightfold Path, that's right. So do people know when the Buddha taught this with this teaching? I mean, he taught in the Avatamsaka Sutra, but do people know anywhere else he might have taught it? So the Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path actually right after leaving the Bodhi tree. When he went to first meet his first, who become his first 5 disciples, the first 5 monks, this is what he taught. In the first 4 or 5 sentences he talks to them, is what's recorded in the suttas, or the sutras. In that text, basically that text is called the beginning, the turning of the wheel of the Dharma, beginning the turning the wheel of the Dharma. And he basically says, monks, or not monks yet, basically friends or, fellow cultivators, I found the middle way. It's not to go to extremes. It's not to go and indulge in sensual pleasures, like what the Buddha had, being in the palace as a prince, being able to have all the pleasures, the sensual pleasures. And it's not extreme asceticism, which he practiced for a while as well. And rather, it's the middle way. And the middle way is what? It's this. It's the Noble Eightfold Path. And throughout his entire life teaching, up to the very end, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, he teaches it still, the Noble Eightfold Path. So this teaching characterizes much of what the Buddha taught. And so it makes sense that the Bodhisattva is learning this Dharma, and he's perfecting it. And he's not perfecting it just for his own self to be able to cultivate. He's perfecting it so that he will be able to rescue and help all living beings. But I think there's another place for some people who might be familiar with the Pure Land School that we also recite this list. Do people remember? Do people practice the Pure Land here at all? The birds that sing, the kalavinkas, the various birds that sing. The birds sing forth sounds which are the 37 wings of awakening, the 5 roots, the 5 powers, the 7 Bodhi way shares, the 8 sagely way shares, and dharmas such as these. So the 8 sagely way shares is a word-for-word translation of Ba Sen Dao Fen. And so that's actually the Noble Eightfold Path. Probably in the future we're going to improve that translation, but that's actually what we recite, every other day in the monastery. And so here tonight we have an opportunity to get a pre-taste of the Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land. So before we get there, we can learn about the Noble Eightfold Path. I don't think I'm quite a bird, but I can explain a little bit maybe. And so tonight we can investigate together this list, the Noble Eightfold Path. What I think to start with is the first one, which is right views. Our views, or sometimes it's translated as right understanding, are extremely important, and it makes sense for the Buddha to start with this. Why? Because this provides, you can say, the framework, the kind of underlying assumptions we have of reality. And it kind of forms our aspirations, it forms our values, it forms our priorities. It basically shapes almost everything we do on what views we have. So it's important to get them right, otherwise we can very easily go astray. So I remember a story when I was a young boy, about 11 years old. I had my little brother, who was at that time about 5 years old, and so we were sitting at the kitchen table, and I thought, I'm gonna play a joke on my little brother. And so I told my little brother, my brother's name is Darren. Darren, I stole all of your power. Now you're going to die. And I would pretend to suck the power out of him. And what he did was actually surprise me a great deal. What he did was he started screaming and crying and
it was like he literally thought he was going to die. I was like shocked. My mom had just left the room, came running back in and saying, "David, what did you do? What did you do to your brother?" I said, "I didn't touch him. I don't know what happened." You know, of course I'm not probably not very good, not very skillful, but but I was really shocked, and so I quickly told him, "I gave all your power back. Here you go." And I pretended to give him back his power, and he completely changed. He went back to normal. He stopped crying, and he was fine. And that experience really kind of shook me because I was like, wow, he believed what I said. That was so obviously like false. How could he have done that? And so what I actually realized later is actually when you're really young, you're really, really impressionable. So it's kind of scary how young kids now are watching television and watching all these things all the time. But that really struck me. And what I realized was in terms of the worldviews, he didn't have much experience of life. So somebody who he trusted, maybe not wise, but his older brother, that told him something, and he believed it, and so that struck me. But as we grow older, we don't always have a broader mind when we learn the right things. We sometimes go astray. We sometimes learn wrong views as well. And so right now what we're learning is we're learning right views. And the Buddha outlines this pretty clearly in many places. In probably the most common that is emphasized is that of believing cause and effect is often translated as believing cause and effect. I sometimes like to understand it, to translate it maybe more as understanding or seeing or following cause and effect. It's not like we have faith in it, like, okay, it's something I just believe. It's something that you can actually see happening. And the Buddha actually really points that out around karmic actions we do with our mind, that we intend to do something. And those have a big effect on our own cultivation on the spiritual path. So it's not that things just kind of happen randomly, but rather there's a cause and there's an effect. So the Buddha said this is one aspect of right view. Basically, good deeds, virtuous deeds, bring good and virtuous fruits, good fruits. And bad deeds bring bad fruits. So that's extremely important if you think about it. That's something that if everybody in the world followed that, I think we'd have a lot less wars between countries. We'd have a lot less fighting between family members. We'd have a lot less fighting internally if people really understood that. That basically, if we were virtuous, internally, if we're virtuous to our own living beings, which are like our anger and hatred, if we treated them with kindness and then beat them up whenever they came up, but really saw this teaching in the sense of holding a view that whatever we do has an effect. It connects. So if we then act out of that, out of a right view, we actually can develop in the right direction. So that's something I think if we really contemplate, we can see a lot of wrong views in the world, just with that principle. And the Buddha gives many, many other elements of it. For instance, the 5 precepts, valuing the 5 precepts, valuing the 10 good deeds or the 10 wholesome karmic actions, as Guo Shunshu just listed them. Being filial to our parents, something not in America we usually have as a right view. Usually it's kind of rebelling against parents, being independent. So that's a right view in Buddhism, is basically honoring our parents. Christians do the same. And respecting our parents, taking care of them. I think in our organization, Dharma Realm Buddhist Association, Venerable Master taught the 6 great principles. So that's also a right view if you really look at it, not fighting. Wow. In the world, oftentimes the view is fighting or greed is good. So what we're learning in the Buddha Dharma is not fighting, not being greedy. So these are all views that we can have. And when we have these views, these understandings, we then can set our course in the right direction. And that's really important, because if we don't have that in the beginning, we can start practicing and go off in the wrong direction. I think people have heard the saying, a proper person practices deviant dharmas, and the deviant dharmas become proper. A deviant person practicing proper dharmas, the proper dharmas become deviant. It's because it comes from that person's heart, what happens. And so that's the first one, is right views. So as I mentioned, it leads to the next one, which is our intentions, what we do. And that's the second one, if you look at the list, it goes to right thought, or also it's translated as right intention. So in Buddhism, people, like I say, the Buddha taught that thought, or our minds, is the leader, is the forerunner of the actions we commit with our body and our mind. So our speech and our physical actions start with our thoughts. Sometimes we might not notice it because we act so quickly or so impulsively. Maybe we're with some family member or our mother or something, and they tell us something, and we're so instinctual. Our response is so quick, we don't see that we actually had a thought before we responded back with something. But we have a thought behind it. And so in Buddhism, the idea is to be able to look at that thought, to get back to that. And here it's about setting our course, the thought that is our aspiration, our intention. Where are we going? And actually going back to that little story I had, if you really look at that story, first I didn't really have really good intentions. I was just kind of playing around with my brother, and I wasn't really honest. That led to a lot of things. And so the idea of having right intention is extremely important because it guides us in our lives. It gets us to go the right direction. So let me just take a quick look. So actually, one thing I realized when I was reflecting on that story was that actually there was something good that happened later, which is actually when I started learning Buddhism and actually various other religions in about junior year in high school. I actually I made a resolve about junior year in high school to stop teasing my little brother. I remember that very consciously, as I said, okay, I'm going to make a decision. I'm not going to make fun of him anymore. I'm not going to just, treat him not nicely. And from then on, actually, our relationship became very positive. It just naturally became good. And we generally got along. I don't think we ever fought from then on. And it all started with that one thought, with a kind of clear intention, I'm not going to do that. So I thought tonight is Chinese New Year Eve, and tomorrow is going to be Chinese New Year. It's a really valuable chance to set an intention, if you have any. We had an opportunity to study the Buddha Dharma and read the sutra text here, which is basically telling us a lot of very wholesome principles. From these principles, we can make a resolve. What are we going to do for, say, the next year, for the rest of our lives? And when we set that, it will help us in our cultivation. So what I really like about this Eightfold Path is that it's so concrete. It talks about, exactly what we're doing every moment of the day and what we're exactly doing in our practice in terms of a long-term lifetime thing. So those are the first two, which is right view and right intention or right thought. So these two then lead to the next two, which is right speech and right action. And so for right speech, I think people are probably pretty familiar with right speech because it came up in the second ground before, when the Bodhisattva was practicing a proper speech. The list is a very often repeated list in Buddhism, and it's a really helpful list because it explains to us what not to do with our mouths, and the 4 things. It's basically 4 things. I would recommend memorizing this because it's just something that's just very useful to have as a tool to reflect on how we use our mouth, which is not lying, is no harsh speech, no idle or frivolous speech, and no divisive speech. The speech that splits people up or hurts people in that way, or slandering people. And so I think it's very obvious why this type of speech isn't so wholesome, right? Lying, if we're trying to cultivate wisdom and understanding things for what they are, every lie we put out there creates confusion for ourselves and creates a confusion in the world. Being deceitful really, it seems to be a quick shortcut to being able to, get something or get some advantage, but in the long run, it just doesn't pan out. And it doesn't work. It's just, we try to protect our ego with some lie, and in the end, it just falls apart. So in Buddhism, we try to not lie, try to be honest. And the next one is harsh speech. And I think if we are just reflecting on back in high school or back in as an adolescence, there's oftentimes harsh speech is pretty common. The swear words, etc., etc., and that's not so valuable because it somehow cuts the nature. It's like there's something inside that feels tense, that tenses up, that kind of feels something like almost like a knife gets stabbed in. Or when it gets really awful, when it's done with really malice, you can almost see the blades flying out of the person's mouth into the other person. That people have watched sometimes arguments, you can see one person speak, and it's just like this laser or this knife going right into that person's heart. Or maybe some people have experienced it themselves, or been the one delivering the dagger. So that's again not skillful speech. That creates harm for ourselves and creates harm in other people. The other one's frivolous speech. Basically, it uses up a lot of our time needlessly, and rather we could be doing something more valuable, like reciting the Buddha's name, meditating or holding mantras, or using our speech skillfully, saying kind words, encouraging people, teaching people, or just being silent and looking inside. So not to just talk carelessly. And the last one is no divisive speech. And this speech is the type that sometimes kind of like gossip. It kind of, you go to one person, you say, oh, this person did bad things. The other person, oh, that person did this bad thing. And ending up, these two friends are no longer friends. Or these two family members no longer get along. And it's kind of weird. Why do we people do that kind of thing? Is it to make ourselves kind of feel better, or that we're, know something, or that we're better friends to that person, try to show the other person up or something? Why do we do that kind of thing? But that's what we do with our mouth sometimes, and that's really hurtful. I think people who have experienced that as well know that's really hurtful. So the Buddha gave really clear instructions. Don't do these things, and that's right speech. That's how to use your mouth properly. And so, yeah, go for it.
One of the reasons for the Noble Eightfold Path is that if you follow it, sometimes you may not be aware of how positive actions can affect other people as well as yourself. Is this better?
Is it loud enough?
Is it louder? Higher?
A little bit.
How about now?
Maybe this volume can be moved up a little bit for the room. Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't hear myself. Is this better?
Not yet.
Testing.
Just the red.
For 1, for 2.
That's because I'm close.
Okay.
You need that all the way up to the top here. All the way up. So like right there.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I lost my train of thought. Okay. How positive actions not just affect people around us, but ourselves. And you can actually conduct an experiment by not. You can try using harsh speech for one whole day to everyone that you meet, and the results will be really obvious. When you do something positive by not practicing harsh speech, it's more subtle. I personally knew someone who mentioned as a joke or just carelessly, he was speaking to a friend on the phone, and he just carelessly told his friend to go kill yourself. And the next day he found out that the friend actually did kill himself. So I think it would be wrong to say that the friend killed himself because of what he said, because the friend already had that thought in mind. But because my friend wasn't paying attention to his speech and was just speaking casually or just joking with someone who he knew as a friend, he has expressed that he regrets what he said for a really, really long time. It took a really long time for him to come to terms with it, and he's still trying to atone for his mistake. So that's just one example I wanted to share, a real example of how something as just speech, even if you're joking, can not just have an effect on the people around you, but most importantly on yourself and on your mind. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, question? Yeah. Mm. What's skillful response? So other people are gossiping, and we're in the presence of that. And what do we do? So I don't. I have one idea about it, and other people have ideas. Please share. But for myself, what I actually really like about Buddhism is that it talks about how these guidelines are for ourselves. So what that means is that it's watching our own minds and giving other people their space to be who they are, and not putting out any kind of judgment to them. That's what I found to be really valuable. So in a way, it's a chance for ourselves to practice as well, is to watch our mind not take not to start criticizing them in our own minds. So it takes it really concretely back to ourselves, and of course, not trying our best not to engage in it ourselves and getting caught up in it. So what I like about it, I remember somebody was explaining the precepts to me that it's like you have to be a square inside and round outside. So inside you're square, you're disciplined, but on the outside you're round and you're accommodating and you're friendly, you're soft. So that's what I find is the most skillful. And I think if one can do that, a lot of situations will naturally become good. So it's not about going out and kind of having a self-righteous attitude and trying to stop people from gossiping because people are gossiping. That's just the way people's habits are. Even for us to change our own habits, it's really hard. So for us is to not engage in it, but then to watch our minds and not be critical of it is what I found to be useful. But I don't know if you have any other.
I would just quote the Bodhisattva on the second ground. He practices it and he tries to lead by example. That's just what Chinwe Shu just said.
Yeah, the second ground, I really recommend if people can read the text of the second ground, it's really inspiring. The Bodhisattva's type of speech is like, wow. Actually, because I just realized when Guo Shunshi mentioned something positive, was that what we were just listing was some of the ways our speech can go wrong. But if we can really use our speech properly, great things can happen as well. And for me, this is how the mantra practices or those kind of things, or say the Amitabha Buddha's name, really connect to me, is that I can see how really bad speech can create really harmful results. And so these sounds and these names are supposed to be very wholesome. So putting out these sounds can make really great, wholesome things happen as well. I might not see it, but it can possibly be like that. So that's how I make sense of that principle, at least. So we want to practice right speech. So that's the third of the Eightfold Path. And so the fourth of the Eightfold Path is right action. So right action is actually already been explained. So I don't know if people remember the right action, which was the 10, say, wholesome karmic actions, or the 10 good deeds. Do people remember that list? Can anybody recite it after hearing it? So it's not too hard to remember. So we just listed 4, which is the mouth, right? No lying, no frivolous speech, no harsh speech, no divisive speech. So 4. And then we have the actions we commit with our body. So that connects with the 5 precepts, which is not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct. So that's 3. And then they say 3 more, which is our mind, which is no greed, no hatred or anger, and what was listed was wrong views or delusion. So those are the 10. So you have 4 for the mouth, 3 for the body, 3 for the mind. And again, I think it's really useful because the Buddha gives such clear guidelines to, this is how you be a good person. Stop doing these things. And I think what's interesting is that the Buddha lists them all out as a don't do this, or refrain from doing this, or no, 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 no. And I think in America, at least I know for myself, hearing the word no isn't the most pleasant. Oftentimes we like to do things to be positive. So we go, be honest speech, gentle speech, beneficial speech, harmonious speech, cherishing life, contentment, being responsible in our relationships, generosity, kindness and compassion, having wisdom. So the positive side of this. But I think there is maybe a deeper wisdom that the Buddha has in why he uses the word no before all of these things. And he's not just trying to, limit our freedom, but because in Buddhism, basically our nature is awake and pure and good already. So if we refrain from doing the bad things, naturally that comes out. So the Buddhism, it's a lot about not doing something, it's actually doing something good. That's a really interesting concept. I think if you really think about it, that's actually something that's not how most people in the world think. We're mostly out trying to do something, but in Buddhism, actually, not doing something is doing something. And it's not easy not to do something. If anybody's been trying to meditate in our Buddha hall during the 2 sits in the day, not doing something takes some work. But that's how we end up waking up.
Refraining from doing an act, an unwholesome act, is actually a wholesome act by itself.
So I was also thought, okay, maybe getting some concrete examples of applying the Eightfold Path, because I think it's really useful. So I don't know if people are aware, but recently the monastery actually has been vandalized. We had, during the couple months ago, we had kids throw rocks through our window in the rebirth hall. And so what happens in the evening, they would come, what we think is basically some kids who play basketball outside, they walk around the hall, the Buddha hall, and they go in the back, side the back, and then we would hear this thud against the wall if they missed the window, or you hear a crack and it breaks through the window. And so actually it happened twice. We had two rocks come through the window. And for those couple of weeks, Guo Shunshi and myself were put on, alert to like make sure, what's happening. And Reverend Heng Sure talked with the lay people on Thursday night and they spent a night just standing guard outside. But finally, what we found was that our next door neighbor had basically clearing out his sidewalk area, found a lot of rocks, which were like perfect, round sized rocks for throwing. They're like perfect size, like hand size, and they had a big pile of them, on his lawn. And so when we looked at that, we're like, wow, that's just too inviting. So one of the laymen went and basically picked them up and brought them to his sister had a garden, like a rock garden, that maybe you could use those. So we talked to the neighbor, and neighbor said, yeah, no problem, I don't really need those rocks, I was just clearing it out. And so that got moved. And so, but we of course paid close attention for a number of weeks, listening. We're always meditating, always like half our ears listening to the door. David could attest. Yeah. Kosher would jump up, run out the door, and let's try to see where the kids are. And so we were for a couple of weeks really paying attention, but pretty much the rock throwing stopped completely. And our conclusion was that they weren't really trying to be malicious. They were just, probably just bored and wanted to have some fun, playing around. So they just threw a rock in there. And if I connect that to my own action for my little brother, it's kind of the same thing. I'm just not really thinking, just trying to play around and created harm. But if I applied this, now if we look at the Eightfold Path in this example, right? Okay, so first is right views. So what's the view here? Well, there's a view of just wanting to have fun. And there's also kind of a view of not really seeing the consequences of one's actions, which is like, I think it's oftentimes, when we're young kids, the idea is, as long as I don't get caught, there's not really any consequences. I can get away with it, right? If I cheat here or do something there, I can get away with it. And so that's kind of a view that one has that could lead to that kind of action that's like that. If we knew that every action we did had a result and will come back in some way, of course we have different actions. So that's one. So the right view caused a thought of, hey, let's have some fun and throw a rock. So it was an intention, and then out comes the action, which is the rock coming through the window, which would be an unwholesome act. You know, probably be somewhat near the stealing one because it's destroying property, is where I would see it. And so that's one example. So it's the Eightfold Path, the first four applied. The other way I wanted to give an example was a positive, which was this last Saturday. A lot of those people aren't here tonight, but we had to spend a day just cleaning the monastery. And in ways, it's almost exact opposite kind of action as throwing rocks and vandalizing the monastery. It's actually adorning the monastery. And they cleaned everything. They kind of cleaned the altar, so that's just everything. I mean, they washed the little flowers on the side with like soap and water very carefully. You know, every nook and cranny. Wow, they're hardworking people cleaning.
Even under the table.
Yeah, they go for everything, and they do it with such joy and happiness. It's just like you can feel the happiness, excitement. Like, wow, look, the bodhisattva's really clean. And before they wash the bodhisattva, they put their palms together. You know, they bow to the bodhisattva. Okay, I'm going to clean, and then they start cleaning. And you could just see, you know, and they're all parents, and you know, probably in their 50s. You know, they're older, you know, and they're like little kids having fun cleaning the monastery. And given I grew up not really cleaning too much, but I can even feel the sense of joy and wanting to participate. So that's a whole different worldview. It's a whole different understanding of the way things are. And there's a sense of wanting to, so in this one, I think there's definitely cause and effect of basically being able to plant a good cause will reap a good effect, doing good deeds. And there's an intention. I'm guessing probably quite a few of them had the intention that by cleaning the monastery, that before Chinese New Year, when Chinese New Year comes, and I hear there might be 200 or 300 people coming tomorrow morning, that maybe some people from seeing such an adorned and clean altar might be inspired to cultivate, might have an aspiration for Bodhi, from seeing something so well kept. So I think probably in some people's hearts they have that kind of intention. And so that's good intention, right? That's wholesome intention, hoping other people will be good. And then the act, which is cleaning, which is doing something that is very wholesome. So you can see the Eightfold Path applied to that instance. And in the monastery, day after day, moment after moment, that's kind of how our lives are. And it's a kind of upward spiral, you know, it kind of goes up and up and up, and doesn't go down and down and down and down. So that's the first four of the Eightfold Path. Upward spiral, yeah, we go up. Actually, they all build on each other. So that's why the Eightfold Path isn't like we cultivate one and then the next one. It's actually you cultivate any of them, and they help all the other ones go up. You know, you go up.
So now it's my turn to speak on the remaining four Noble Eightfold Path, and the next one on the list is right livelihood. So again, the Buddha was very precise when he listed down what constitutes right livelihood. And the list goes, earning a living in a righteous way. And what does that mean? By legal means. So if you're in a country where the laws don't allow you to do something, and if you earn your living in a way that breaks the laws, that's not right livelihood. If you earn a living through peaceful means without violence or coercion, that's right livelihood. If you earn a living honestly and not by trickery or deceit, that's also right livelihood. If you earn your living in ways that do not harm others or make them suffer, such as you don't deal in weapons. Weapons is a hot topic right now. A lot of people get killed. Innocent people get killed with weapons. If you don't deal in living beings, human trafficking, for example, and if you don't deal in meat, butchery, in poisons or intoxicants, then you are doing right livelihood. And the last one is by not earning a living through soothsaying or divination. That means you don't tell other people's fortunes. So that's livelihood. And the reason why I'm smiling as I'm saying all this is I used to be in advertising. And in advertising, you're not exactly you bend the truth a lot. Yes. I remember for one of my clients, when I presented what we had done with their brand and the new write-up, my clients told me that, wow, I never knew that my product could be so good. So, okay. So the Thai tradition has a very interesting interpretation of right livelihood. They break it down to 3 categories, and it's really, really relevant for anyone who's earning a living. The first category is rightness regarding actions. That means if any worker should always fulfill their duties diligently and conscientiously, and not idle away time or claiming to have worked longer when they have not. So that's the first category for people who work for other people. The second one is rightness regarding people, which means that you need to give due respect and consideration to your employees, your employers, your colleagues, and to your customers. For example, if you are an employer, you should assign your workers only chores that they are able to carry out and not beyond them or to demean them, for example. Colleagues should try to cooperate rather than compete, while merchants should be equitable in their dealings with customers. And the third one, in the Thai tradition of defining what right livelihood is rightness regarding objects. That means that in any business transactions, you do not cheat. You do not say that this thing weighs 500 pounds when it's actually less, and you weigh it to be 500 pounds. So there's no deceptive advertising, no misrepresentations of quality or quantity, or dishonest maneuvers. Okay, so that's right livelihood. The next 3 is actually part of a group. It is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And all these pertain to the workings of the mind when you meditate. So it's best for me to use a simile of how right effort works together with right mindfulness and right concentration. So the simile goes like this. Right concentration is a tall boy who is reaching to get a flower that's beyond his reach. Right effort is the second boy who bends over and tells the first boy, he said, you can climb on my back to reach the flower. And then right mindfulness is a third person who tells the boy, he said, you can use my shoulder to stabilize yourself. So that's a triangle of how right effort supports right mindfulness and in turn supports right concentration. So right concentration is stabilized, kind of like how when we sit in full lotus. You have your concentration and it's stabilized by mindfulness and right effort. So having said that, I will now go into what right effort is. There are 4 kinds of right efforts. The first is to prevent the arising of unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. So you're sitting there, and if you are prone, like I am, to think about food, for example, so this means that you have to do something to make sure that you don't think about food all the time. So it's a preventive measure. The second one of right effort is to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen, which is what I always experience. I sit there and I start thinking about food. So I have to put that thought down, and there are various ways to do that. The third one is to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen. So I can sit there and use skillful means to provide myself with feelings of contentment, that what I have is enough, so that my mind the greed doesn't come up and my mind doesn't move away from a meditation topic, for example. And the fourth one is to maintain and perfect wholesome states that have already risen. So if I already have good concentration, is to maintain that state. And one of the ways to understand or to memorize right effort would be the simile of a farmer tending to a field. So unwholesome states are weeds. that are present in the field. So the first one, to prevent the arising of unwholesome states that have not yet arisen, is what a farmer does when he tills the field, when he plows the field before he plants anything. So that kills off all the weeds that have, so that prevents any weeds from arising. So the second one, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. That means weeding. Every day he goes through the field and he picks up all the weeds that will suck all the nutrients away from his crop. So that's the second, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. Number 3, to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen. He has planted his crop. So to make sure the crop grows, he waters the crop. He makes sure the crop, the soil is fertile. He makes sure he plants his crops in the place that have enough sunlight. So he creates the conditions so that wholesome states will arise. And the fourth one, to maintain and perfect wholesome states already risen. So once his crop has started growing, has sprouted, he maintains his practice to the end, and he doesn't stop halfway. So he gets to enjoy the harvest or the fruits of his meditation. So that's one way to look at what right effort is, from how a farmer will till his land. Then we move on to right mindfulness. Mindfulness is presence of mind, or attentiveness, or awareness. But it's not the mindfulness that people have on a daily basis. For example, I am mindful of this table. This table has a pane of glass over it. It is made of wood. It is brown. That is not true awareness. True awareness is a kind of awareness that does not project thoughts. What I just described is me interpreting what I'm seeing. So I'm not aware of the table, but I'm aware of what I'm projecting onto the table, my interpretation of what the table actually is. But when the Buddha says right mindfulness, that I need to read this. The mind is deliberately kept at the level of bare attention, a detached observation of what is happening within us and around us in the present moment. In the practice of right mindfulness, the mind is trained to remain in the present, contemplating the present event. All judgments and interpretations have to be suspended, or if they occur, just registered and dropped. So the task of right mindfulness is to simply note whatever comes out just as it occurs in the mind, and just to write the change of events in the way a surfer writes the waves on the sea. So if I'm meditating and the thought comes out on the table, I don't cling or I don't follow the thought if the table is made of wood or plastic. I don't try to interpret what is happening in my mind as my thoughts come up. So I just recognize that I have a thought. I may be feeling hungry. I just recognize that it is a thought of hunger, but I do not attach to it in the way that someone would normally say, I am hungry. When it becomes I, you become a part of the thought. So you just recognize that you have thoughts coming up, and then you put it down. And then thoughts will come up, and then you just let it go by not following your thoughts. So that's what constitutes right mindfulness. So it says further in one of the commentaries, to practice mindfulness is thus a matter not so much of doing, but actually undoing. And what are we undoing? We are doing our habits of how we perceive things as we see them to be. So we should not think, we should not judge, we should not associate or plan or imagine or wish, or any of the things that we normally do when we contemplate an object. Yeah, please.
So just to make it more concrete for many of us here, mindfulness actually is what we do a lot in the practice of the Buddha Dharma. Like we're trying to be mindful of the Buddha. That's proper mindfulness. If you just connect it to the description Guo Shen just said, is we're keeping the mind attentive to the present of something. We're not interpreting it. We're not like thinking, oh, Amitabha Buddha, I really like Amitabha Buddha. That sound is really nice. Or that name is really pretty. Or You know, you're not thinking about it. You're just reading Ami Tofo Ami, or you're saying that great compassion mantra, or you're investigating Chan. You're not having all this other interpretation around it. So that's mindfulness. We're practicing that all the time, and that's something I think in the West actually people have picked up a lot. Is this teaching on mindfulness? Actually, they've taken it almost without the rest of the Buddhism. They said, well, we're a mindfulness training place, but Buddhism, we're not sure about the religious part. But mindfulness is something that in medical sciences, in various places, they've picked up on it because they actually see it being useful for dealing with pain. You know, since we're not interpreting all the various things that are going on, you can actually be with pain in a different way. It's a way of being aware of what's happening, you know, in a different way. So here, though, in Buddhism, it's part of a package, this Eightfold Path, and various other packages as well. But in the Eightfold Path, it's leading us towards awakening. With all the other factors together, it leads us to awakening. And so it's something that if people try to practice it on a, you know, moment to moment every day, and you can do it all the time, like you're sitting right now in the audience, or driving in your car, or waiting in line, you can do it anywhere. It's the ultimate antidote for boredom. You know, I think for young kids now, boredom is horrible. So actually, if you have this practice, you'll never have to ever be bored, because you always have something to do with your mind.
Yeah, but they will tell you that's boring.
That's boring. That's maybe until they see how it works. But the thing is, because if you're actually really mindful, you see where even the boredom starts from, if that makes sense. It's something that's just another thought. So what I find with the mindfulness is that it actually helps support all the other factors. So when we want to develop wisdom, we want to be able to have right views. If we're mindful, a lot of things naturally develop. So although sometimes just saying the mindfulness training without the rest of Buddhism isn't exactly the most, it's not the most skillful in the sense that you're leaving out parts of it, but at the same time, from that, it is possible to maybe develop other elements. So it's really a very, very place, I think, here in the West, the Dharma is coming in really deep. And it's something that we do all the time. You know, that's what we're doing all the time in cultivation, is watching our mind, being mindful. So just putting some context.
So how do we watch the mind to make sure that we achieve right mindfulness? The Buddha gave us a practice called the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the mindful contemplation of the body. The second one is contemplation of feelings. The third one is contemplation of states of mind. And the last one is contemplation of all phenomena, or all conditioned dharmas. Then we come to the last of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is right concentration. Right concentration is the concentration of the mind in a wholesome state that leads to the calming of the mind in all other faculties. So basically it means one-pointed concentration that enables you to calm your entire mind down, and for you to maintain that one single-mindedness concentration. So right concentration, again, to go back to the simile, is balanced by right mindfulness and supported by right effort. Everyone get that so far? I'm still confused, so if you get it, it's really good. That must be okay, we have 10 minutes left, so to quickly wrap up before we go to the Q&A. Okay. The whole of the this chapter on the 4th ground is basically the 37 wings of enlightenment, as stated by Chin Lei just now. So the beginning right to now, the Bodhisattva is practicing what is called the 37 wings to enlightenment. Why is it called the wings to enlightenment? If you think about the wings, like on a bird, because we don't fly. So what do wings represent? Wings represent being able to lift you up from one place and transporting you to another place that you otherwise can't reach on foot, or would be harder to reach on foot. So similarly, wings to enlightenment means if you follow these 37 practices, it will bring you all the way to perfect enlightenment. Right? Okay. So the 37 wings of enlightenment occurs throughout all the Buddha's teachings. For example, in the Southern or the Pali Canon, they divide up the sutras into 5 major sections: the Digha Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, the Anguttara Nikaya, and the Khuddaka Nikaya. The 37 wings of enlightenment are found in every one of these collection of sutras. It is also found in the Dhammapada and the Jataka. The Jataka is a collection of tales of the Buddha's past lives. In the Mahayana, Shin Shu has already said that the 37 wings of enlightenment is in the Amitabha Sutra. The 37 wings of enlightenment are also in the Lotus Sutra. And my guess is it's also in a lot of other Mahayana sutras, but I don't know because I haven't read them yet. Or haven't even identified that the Buddha was actually speaking about the 37 wings of enlightenment. Yeah. So I guess might be a good time if anyone has a note and they wish to write down what the 37 wings to enlightenment are. 4 frames of reference, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and finally the 8 noble path, the noble eightfold path. So all these add up to 37, and if you want the full list, just go back to the beginning of the 4th ground, and all the practices that are listed there make up the 37 wings to enlightenment.
Just to give you a page number, it starts from page 7, from page 7 to 13. So if you want to start from page 7, disciples of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, who stays upon the 4th ground, looks closely at his own person. He invokes the contemplation of the body. That's where it starts, and it ends here with the 4th ground, page 13, right samadhi. So that whole list and that whole section is basically the 37 wings of awakening, and he goes through it. So people can look at that and contemplate that. So that's a very rich kind of a list of Dharma. The list again?
Okay.
But I think we have, it's almost 9. So I don't know if you have any questions or any additions, or if you have any corrections. If Guo Shunshi and myself, we are still learning the Dharma. So if anybody has any thoughts and things would like to add, please feel free.
Or share.
Or share.
Or suggestions.
Okay. What the question is basically that given today is Chinese New Year, it's also one of the 6 vegetarian days of in Buddhism. And so how does one, gather with family, and oftentimes they don't hold the same precepts, and it becomes a little bit difficult to hold it. Can I ask for I wanted to ask actually that question exactly are you talking about the Bodhisattva precepts, or are you talking about just being vegetarian? Bodhisattva precepts. Okay, so in the Bodhisattva precepts, there's on the 6 vegetarian days, the precept is to actually hold the 8 precepts, and the one that's relevant for this one is that basically you don't eat past the noon, right? That's the question. And so how do you not eat past noon on a day when your whole family gets together, and like tonight supposedly all the family members are getting together and having their dinner, and it's a great festive kind of event, and you'll be kind of left out, or people will start criticizing Buddhism as being no fun, right? That's the question, right? Yeah, okay. you have an answer?
Um, from from my experience dealing with people who have observed this precept, as well as personal experience from holding this precept, I've heard advice that you try to maintain the precepts as much as you can, but because the precepts are also expedient, if holding the precepts actually cause distress to other people, that's not in line with the practices of a bodhisattva as well. So there are certain occasions where the precepts may have to take, how would I put it skillfully? If people don't understand the precepts and have no comprehension about Buddhism, and in the case where holding the precepts will actually cause them to have a negative view about what you're doing, then you have to use your wisdom to see if you want to hold the precepts in those situations or not. But there are also other situations where I know of family members, for example, like my mom, who stood fast to her holding of the precepts, but it was with her own family. It wasn't with outsiders. So eventually, my father became a vegetarian, for example. But it took many years, 10, 15 years. But my mom had a lot of patience. Yeah, she had amazing patience. So that was one way. But so you have to weigh the circumstances of and truly understand what it means to be, what the Bodhisattva precept truly means. It also means holding the precepts in your mind. Yeah. So you can hold the precepts within your mind and still accord with the people that you are with. That's one way as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if I put it in a skillful way.
It's a really tough situation. I mean, that's really tough. So
Yeah, you shouldn't just take my advice.
let's ask more people. Yeah, get more people's feedback. But that's. Anybody else have some thoughts? Yeah, Phil. So Lunar New Year. Yeah. So many other parts of the, Vietnamese. It's a lot of cultures celebrate. We're on the lunar calendar. Today is the Korean Vietnamese. It's a new year. So, I guess just my feeling for that question is I don't think I'm going to really be helpful for your solution. But I know when we take the precepts, we often have to consider the environment we are in. I know that, for instance, the Bodhisattva precepts especially, taking the Bodhisattva precepts and say your spouse isn't very happy with it, I mean, doesn't agree with it, it would be a difficulty. It would be a real difficulty because it actually impinges on other people's space in some ways, what they're doing. And so we want to take things step at a time. And what I find is that if we're really sincere and we really have an intent to cultivate the Dharma, because we understand this is a good thing to do, that we can slowly cultivate the supporting structures, the right relationships with our parents, the right relationship with our friends, kind words. So when our actions, and then when we start taking on these kind of practices, people will, in their hearts, have an openness to it. It's not, you can see sometimes people can get self-righteous. Well, this is a question about, people gossiping around us, is there's this immediate sense of criticalness that comes up. Gosh, they're gossiping. Oh, and you kind of, and people may not say anything, but they feel it. Oftentimes people will feel the judgment. And if we can really be completely no judgment, if we can be at this dinner table with everybody and not eat, just drink some water, or drink something, some juice or something, and just be friendly with everybody, but not give any rise to any kind of criticism to them about their eating, or even they're eating meat, or if they're, just having fun, or, I think Chinese New Year is supposed to be like a gambling day too. They're just doing what they do, right? Not having any, in our hearts, any judgment towards them. They're family members. They're doing what they're doing. And we're happy doing what we're doing because we understand what we're setting our intention to do. And in our hearts of hearts, we want them to be happy and well and peaceful and find ultimate awakening as well. But that has to be requested by them for us. So my sense is, rather than looking at just that moment, to look at a broader picture. Say, okay, so I would like to take the Bodhisattva precepts. Now, what kind of relationships do I need to cultivate with all my family members over a period of time to get there? And if we put those seeds there, with that vow in our heart to taking the Bodhisattva precepts, it'll happen, because our vows are, it's either vow power or karmic power, right? So if our vows are strong, we'll get there.
But as you've already taken the precepts, I just recall, I guess you have to exhaust all avenues first. You have to try to convince them. So if the situation where if your decision not to join them spoils the whole mood and makes everyone really upset, then that would not be a skillful decision. But if they can understand through your explanation, if you have the necessary skill or wisdom, not just to explain, but to also know how they will take to your explanation, and it works, and they're happy, they say, okay, they're okay with you following a precept, and it doesn't spoil the whole mood of the dinner or the reunion or the gathering. So that would be, you need to do that first, if you can.
Any other questions? We're about 9 o'clock, so. Anything else? Okay. Anything from online, Locke? Amidobo. Heng Sure.
He's online.
We hear feedback in the future. How many people were online? Wow. We have 50 people. Okay. Okay, so we do transference? Okay. So on the back of your sheet. Oh. Yeah.
Oh,
the announcements, yeah. So tomorrow we have Chinese New Year here, or Lunar New Year. We'll have a lot of different people coming. And it will be starting at 9 a.m. And we will have...
Everyone's invited.
Yeah, everybody's invited. We have a tarp. If you actually go to our parking lot now, we have a tarp that covers the entire parking lot. So it's going to be overflow for people eating. And I hear there's going to be 200 or 300 people here. So it will be very festive. There'll be a lot of energy. And so people are very welcome to come. So it'll just be in the morning at 9 a.m. And we'll have some talks around 10. And then we'll have lunch ceremony about 11 o'clock. And then I'm sure it's going to be people who have lunch here have seen it's really good lunches here.
We'll have a Om Mani Padme Hum recitation ceremony for 1 hour.
About 1 hour, yeah, 1 hour.
That's for world peace. So that's one chance to practice the Bodhisattva path, doing something for the sake of others.
And after that, after lunch, that ends the day. So if people have the morning free, that's a really wholesome thing to be part of. And actually, as an announcement, next week on Saturday, Chirfasher will be here. So if you know Chirfasher, she's the most senior bhikshuni in this organization. She became a nun in 1969, I believe. So she was one of the original 5 monastics in America who left home in America very, very early. So she'll be able to come. And so it's a really rare opportunity because she's usually in Australia. So for her to come and lecture here is a really wonderful opportunity.
And depending on who you ask, she's probably the most senior Western bhikshuni in America. Yeah, so please come.
Any other things we left out? 7:30 for this lecture. Yes. Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving
unity. May their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows to the Buddhas.